Like everyone else in the Monster Hunter community, I am currently excited out of my mind for Monster Hunter Wilds. And like everyone else, I am very, very impatient for the news that we will be getting in summer and the eventual game release in 2025. So, because I am currently kind of in between things, and because the hype for the original trailer has died down a little bit and everyone is a little more cold-headed, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring and talk a little about what I thought of the trailer, and specifically what theories I have of things that might be or might not be in Monster Hunter Wilds. I just wanted to be something low stakes and a little fun, just thinking about all the possible things we might be seeing in the new game next year. Now, the first theory that immediately started floating around after the trailer was, is this new game going to take place in the New World, the continent that Monster Hunter World was situated in? That's a fair question. It's an odd thing that we got this new continent in one game and just haven't really heard of it since. Monster Hunter Rise was, if you're unaware, entirely in the Old World continent, and possibly in Fun Run depending on where you think the Forlorn Citadel is, but that's a separate topic. The trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds gives us a few hints that might lead us to think that it's in the New World. Most pressingly, the hunter appears to wear a slinger and a scout fly cage. Now, this is not entirely conclusive, both of these things could just be accessories to the armor set that he's wearing, but it definitely looks like it, so it's worth considering. There's also the fact that the New World remains largely unexplored, so there is a lot of potential for wherever this weird grassy plain might be. Another interesting find is that in this piece of Monster Hunter World concept art, which depicts the Second Fleet's smithy, we can see a symbol hanging above the smithy that looks suspiciously like the game logo for Monster Hunter Wilds. This symbol does not appear in Monster Hunter World, but it is seemingly present here in the concept art. And I think it kinda looks like it. It's worth a thought at least. So perhaps this new game will take place in the New World with us as part of an expanded research commission. I don't think so, however, for a few reasons. One, I don't think we could ever be part of the Research Commission, at least not as it is characterized in Monster Hunter World and its lore, because there, the Research Commission is a fairly small organization with an extremely specific goal, which was to investigate the Elder's Recess. Once that is done, I can't really imagine us seeing an expanded version of that effort, unless of course they write new lore, which they always could. But also personally, I hope it's not in the New World. While I love Monster Hunter World and I think it would be really cool to see more of this continent, I also think there's so much left on the old continent that we haven't seen. It's interesting that we got this original map back during the Monster Hunter DOS and Freedom Unite days, and how much of it we just haven't touched since. So if I had to choose, I would definitely prefer if it took place in the old world with an actual world map. For the love of God, Capcom, please just give me my world map. This next one isn't as much of a theory as it's seemingly been confirmed, but when the trailer first dropped and when people saw that it felt very much like a second part to Monster Hunter World, the elusive Monster Hunter World 2, if you will, a lot of people were wondering who would be directing the game. Well, wondering seems to be over because Yuya Tokuda has seemingly confirmed that he will be directing Monster Hunter Wilds. Tokuda was one of the directors for Monster Hunter World, specifically being in charge of game design. Now that's really exciting. Tokuda is an absolute veteran and a Chad within the Monster Hunter team. He soloed Monster Hunter 1 Fatalis, apparently, according to a thing I'm currently translating. So he is an OG guy, and his involvement in World was felt very positively. Base World had a massive focus on tangibility and the interconnectivity between environment and story, and the way the player engages with it. If you think about all the different ways in which you can engage with endemic life in Monster Hunter World, the well-realized ecological shifts between environments, such as the high and low humidity areas of the ancient forest, or the coral highlands and the Rotten Vale, looking at all of that, it does give you the impression that Tokuda's involvement might herald a return or even an enhanced focus on environmental cohesion, and capital E ecology. It's weird to say this because when World first came out, everyone was calling it baby's first Monster Hunter, but compared to Rise, Monster Hunter World was a more grounded game. A game that felt much more invested in trying to create atmosphere and vibe through the environment rather than just through moment-to-moment combat gameplay. In that sense, it might be a departure from Monster Hunter Rise's more power fantasy-esque approach to game design. Basically what I'm trying to say is that Wilds is probably going to be much closer to World than it will be to Rise, and it might inherit many of World's design decisions regarding how the player engages with the environment. And even if I'm wrong, I'm just glad to have Tokuda back. He seems like a really solid pick for a game like this. Another thing that was immediately on everyone's mind was, what's up with that raptor? Monster Hunter Rise introduced mounts with the Palamutes, which felt like a really natural extension of palicos, as you know, dogs and cats. But the raptor is kind of an odd choice, because not only is it a mount, it seems to be able to traverse the environment basically without limitations. In the trailer we see it jump from rock to rock, and while that spot does seem to look like a predetermined jumping spot, I do think that it implies that we're going to have a lot of freedom in how we move around the environment. Now, mobility has been a huge topic for 5th gen Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter World basically entirely retooled how movement feels in the Monster Hunter series, and Rise just went nuts with it, with wire bugs and the special moves that you could pull off. And I think that we're going to see a sort of marriage of these two approaches, a middle ground, if you will. I think that on the Raptor, we are going to have a mobility that's going to be similar to Palamutes and wirebugs together. The ability to run fast across vast plains, and the ability to jump over and scale obstacles efficiently, giving us freeform exploration in these environments that will presumably be quite beautiful and interesting to explore. However, I also firmly believe that the Raptor will not be usable in combat. I think that based on how the mainline games of Monster Hunter have approached combat, having the ability to fight while mounted and while having the full mobility of the Raptor would probably be too big of a disruption of the natural gameplay flow. Usually the games experiment with stuff like that in the portable games like Rise, but for mainline games like World and Wilds, they don't tend to mess with it quite as much. So yeah, I think the Raptor is going to give us enormous mobility outside of combat, but be basically unusable while you're engaged with a monster. Also, the Raptor has to be called Paleopteryx. It's non-negotiable. Now, because we all know that we're going to have to wait until 2025 for this game, some theories and approaches to trailer analysis have been a little silly, and I think my favorite one is people going absolutely nuts over the logo with the 6 dragon heads and trying to analyze what this could mean, what monster this could be. And unfortunately, looking back over the mainline games, which have historically had these sort of dragon heady logos, they've rarely meant much. They have mostly just said, yes, this is a mainline game and the number of heads is the number of the game. So this is Monster Hunter 6 having 6 dragon heads. But beyond that, it's probably not possible to really get anything out of this. I do think one thing that has merit is the way the logo is introduced in the trailer, with like these water drops falling and the ripples forming the circles inside of the logo. That seems extremely deliberate, and I do agree that that's worth investigating. Some people think that means underwater combat is coming back. I have thoughts on that. That'll be later on in this video. But I think what this could actually imply is that we might see a much bigger focus on environmental shifts. As I mentioned earlier, with Tokuda back at the helm, we could see a bigger focus on the ecosystem. And one thing that was basically entirely absent from Monster Hunter World was the weather, was the cycles of water and how all that got recycled and how that affected animals. Whereas in the trailer, the first thing we're shown of this game is the fact that the environment and the weather is going to interact in interesting ways. The entire trailer is basically just the hunters surviving a massive storm and the environment being changed due to the weather. So perhaps this is what these water droplets allude to, but again, logos have not meant much historically in the Monster Hunter franchise. Okay, enough dilly-dallying, let's talk about the big one. Is this game going to be open world? Personally, the trailer as well as the name Monster Hunter Wilds, certainly gives open-worldy vibes. However, I don't think we will ever get a Monster Hunter game that is fully open world. I'm talking, you know, like GTA or Red Dead Redemption open world, where it's just all one big contiguous space. I just don't see that happening for Monster Hunter. It doesn't quite fit, because Monster Hunter always relies on a variety of environments and habitats to have a varied monster roster. And doing that on that scale in a way that feels natural and immersive would be pretty difficult. Think of how Skyrim made the region of Skyrim feel really small because, yeah, the play space was pretty big, but it wasn't an entire country big. So I don't really think that that would work, having to have volcanoes and ice areas and swamps all in one contiguous space like that. I think rather we're going to see an iteration and expansion of Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise's system of massive separate maps. Think of how the Ancient Forest and the Wildspire Waste are not connected gameplay-wise, they're just close together, but each one of these areas constitutes its own sort of open world. Maybe a better example would be the way The Witcher did it, where you had big open world maps that were nonetheless separate from each other. This allows you to do specific themed maps without having to find bullshit ways in which they transition into each other. I think that's more likely for something like this, and personally I prefer it. Another something that a lot of people have been asking about when seeing this trailer is the possibility of a new weapon. Now, some of that stems from the fact that some people think the guy in the trailer has a new weapon. I don't think so, it just looks like a great sword or a long sword. They can look weird sometimes, so I wouldn't read into it too much. But, you know, it's been a while since we've gotten a new weapon, and people keep asking about it. I don't see it. I feel like we're done with new weapons, at least for the foreseeable future. That is because introducing a new weapon would mean essentially rebalancing the entire established formula around that weapon. Now, it's possible. We might get a new weapon. I'm not Capcom. If we do get a new weapon, I think there's really only one choice. The one niche that is not filled is fast and blunt. We have no weapon in the game that can apply blunt damage quickly, unless you count the guns, which I don't. And with that, we have a solid candidate there, which is the Tonfas from Monster Hunter Frontier, which were essentially blunt dual blades with a couple of extra quirks. Now, if we get a new weapon, my money is on getting reworked Tonfas. They just seem like the most reasonable next step. I wouldn't hold my breath for it though, as I said, I don't think this is likely. Now, just like with every Monster Hunter game, one question that immediately pops up is, what monsters are going to be in? How many monsters will there be? Will the new monsters be any good? And look, we're not oracles, I can't see the future, there's really no way to predict this accurately, but we can make a couple of assumptions. First of all, I think at launch we can expect between like 28 and 35 monsters, like large monsters. That seems to be the general number most of these games have at the start with the base game. Keep in mind, we are talking about base games here, expansions are a different thing. But it also could be smaller, right? If they're really trying to do like a big revolutionary ecosystem type game where many different factors have to interact with each other, if it's a game full of systems that need to be double checked and bug proofed, then I could imagine that they might do fewer monsters just because, you know, there's only 24 hours in the day and there's only so many days in a development cycle. Something needs to give. And if they decide that, well, we can only do 25 monsters in 28, whatever, I don't mind that too much. I just want Monoblos back. For the love of God, why the fuck haven't we gotten Monoblos back already? It's so weird. But generally, I hope that the roster is overall more varied, closer to Monster Hunter Rise than Monster Hunter World, because while I love World really suffered from the fact that it was basically Wyvern Hunter, right? There was a single non-Wyvern monster, and that was Rajang, which was in Iceborne and in an update. So I really hope that from the get-go, we have a more diverse roster with different monster types, maybe bring in some more crabs. Hell, if you want to start bringing in new frontier monsters like you did with Espinos, bring in Tycoon Zamuza. He's a cool crab, he's awesome, he has a cool fight, and he would fit right in. I also think it's interesting that they make a point to not show any known monsters in the trailer except Rathalos. But I also think they might have accidentally given something away here, because the little monkey guys that chase the hunter and brutalize the pangolins, they kind of look like Gosharag, don't they? Interesting. But as I said, difficult to predict anything. Sometimes they just do crazy shit, so my hopes are just that we get the usual 30-ish monsters with a wider variety of body types and monster types. And Monoblos, pretty please. Alright, here's a spicy one. Cross-save and crossplay. Now if you aren't aware, cross-save and crossplay, that is to say the ability to access your saves and to play with friends regardless of which console you or they are on, is one of those features that has been highly requested for the Monster Hunter games for the past few years. It was fueled when, back during Rise's lifetime, a questionnaire came out by Monster Hunter that mentioned it, and people assumed that this meant that Sunbreak, the expansion, would introduce cross-save or crossplay, which it didn't. So it's kind of been a hot topic. So the question is, will Monster Hunter Wilds support cross-save and or crossplay? Again, we can't know for sure. There are a couple of interesting things to consider though. Monster Hunter Wilds will launch simultaneously on all platforms except the Nintendo Switch, so we'll have it on PlayStation, Xbox, and on Steam. At the same time, now that Sunbreak is over, Capcom has done quite a bit of work in order to try and get people to sign up for Capcom ID, which is a sort of unified game login that allows you to track and connect various accounts across various consoles, be it PSN or Steam. The fact that they're doing that, while also saying that the next game is going to be on all platforms, does give me a little bit of hope. Capcom ID seems like the perfect way to handle at least cross-saves, to tie saves to your Capcom ID as opposed to just a local console. So maybe we'll get cross-save at least. I have no idea what this means for cross-play, the ability to actually play with people on all consoles. Maybe that as well, but I don't know. Personally, this kind of stuff isn't really on my, top desired features list. I just don't care that much about it, but I understand that it's very highly requested, so it would be cool if they would do some steps in that direction, for sure. Alright, I promised we'd get to this. Underwater combat. Will it come back? No. I don't think so, at least. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Now, if you know your Monster Hunter history, then you know that underwater combat was an extremely strenuous thing to develop. It derailed Monster Hunter Tri's development pretty much entirely. We don't know exactly what happened and where the difficulty was, but from what we've heard over the years, it seems that making the game work, just making it function with underwater combat in it, was such an enormous task that it led to various features and monsters getting scrapped. Monster Hunter Tri was one of the first Monster Hunter games to downscale from the previous one, while Monster Hunter DOS included every game in every Monster Hunter series, as did Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. Monster Hunter Tri removed many of those monsters, and even removed weapons, because it had to focus on making underwater combat work. Not only was this such an enormous task that took so many resources, it also wasn't worth it. Underwater combat was generally not well received at the time, and while people have sort of turned around on it now, that's mostly because people get kinder to things as time passes. Underwater combat is fine, but it's not worth that much sacrifice. Not to mention that underwater combat, after all of that, still only constituted a tiny part of the game. There are just about 5 or 6 monsters in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, the expansion, that you can actually fight underwater. That's 5 monsters out of 50, 10%. It's just a huge sink of resources and time that just didn't really make sense at the time. It didn't pay off. Now, would they really attempt this again at a time when making games is more expensive than ever? And at such a crucial junction for the game series as a whole regarding its mainstream popularity? I don't know, I just don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe they'll do underwater combat and it'll be great this time, but I don't think so. Alright, final one. Time for some fun. Ancient Civilization. The boogeyman of all Monster Hunter loreheads. If you're not aware, the Ancient Civilization is a rather vague concept in some of the games of an ancient civilization, a group of people that had advanced technology and special knowledge about the world that just disappeared. You know the drill, you've seen mystery movies before. Obviously, when in the trailer we get to see this big spiral mountain thingy, people thought, oh, maybe this has something to do with the ancient civilization. Maybe the lightning rods kind of tie into it. Maybe this will be the game where we finally get all that juicy lore. I don't think so. I'm sorry to be such a downer about this stuff, but the ancient civilization is very rarely directly referenced in any of the mainline games. A lot of what people think is lore and canon about them is actually stuff that was mistranslated or falsely brought in from games like Frontier, which are dubious in their connection to the mainline canonicity. So it's hard to really even have a top-down overview of what is actually true about the ancient civilization. And the games haven't really helped since. They've barely ever mentioned them. Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise basically pretend they don't exist, as far as I'm aware. And personally, I think the ancient civilization is kind of a dead concept. I think we've moved past that idea, if it ever really was as big of an idea as some people say it was. I think it's much more likely that we are now going to keep hearing about various ancient civilizations, right? Like the guys who built the ruins under Moga, maybe indigenous ancient civilizations of the New World if the game takes place in the New World. The ancient people who might have lived in the Everwood and built those ruins, yada yada. Like, I just don't think there's much stock anymore in the ancient civilization mythos. If they do it, and if they prove me wrong, that would be great. You know my channel, you know what I do. I absolutely adore it when they give us concrete, good information about this world and its lore. So yeah, I'd be head over heels if it turned out that the plot of this game is about the ancient civilization. I just don't think that's the case. Anyway, those were just my thoughts on the trailer and some of the theories I've seen floating around. I hope you had fun, I hope you learned something, and let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree with what I said. If you have your own personal theories, I'd love to read them. It's going to still be a long time until summer, so we do have to keep ourselves busy. But yeah, take care everyone, bye. A very special thank you to all of our patrons, including Big Bento, My Name Gone, The Dollarfish, Yamiroth, Andre, Ryan Hook, Thick, Kuroneko, Zine HV Augensen, AJ Rivera, Alistair, Jacob Bennett, Soruka, Gangratist, Sir Newt Newt, Terrador, Emperor Eevee, Rambling Robin, Lizric, Hashi, Black Ace 202, Dissy, Habo Himbro Mirror, Magenta Magenta, Danilo Villavicencio, Arcturian 711, Russell, Person 212, Claire Miboon, Oakwood Tree, Mr. Pyramid, Pide Fuego, Makot 02, Project Iceman, Geo, Nils Schlatter, Iron Camel, and nah, I'm going to bed. Take care everyone, bye bye.